Hello and good evening. Welcome to It's About Time. I am Sister Trudy, and we are here tonight to actually go through um, the book of Genesis, and we are taking off again here in chapter 19. So we'll find out from chapter 19 of the things that actually have been going on, and we kind of continue over from where we stopped off last night. And we're going to start talking about the angels that actually came to Sodom. And this is where we're going to start at. So let's get started. We have these three chapters. We want to make sure that we are here and available, that if anyone has any questions about anything, that maybe they can ask in the chat and we can answer those. Okay, so it says, now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening. So now when we just get with the very first portion of it, we know that Lot is a part of this particular city because he was sitting in the gate of Sodom. So he had reason to be there. He was basically considered to have some type of official capacity because he is a part of this. He's sitting at the gate. He has a place to actually be. And it says, when Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face toward the ground. He said, "Hear now, my lords, please turn in to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet." Now, we all know that during those times that when travelers are sojourning through the different environments or territories, that one of the things that is a sign of hospitality is that you actually offer someone a place to rest and as well to wash their feet because there's so much dust that accumulates through the travel. So it's a sign of hospitality there. And then so it says, and then you may rise early and go. And they say no, but we will spend the night in the open square. But he insisted strongly. So they turned into him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Now the two visitors that departed from Abraham in Genesis over in the 18th chapter, and as they continued this conversation, now they're come to actually Sodom. And the first time they're actually being identified as more so as angelic beings, not just a regular man, not regular men coming, but as angelic beings. And what we have here is that Lot is here, as we talked about again. He's a part of this particular community. And that's one point that we need to drive that actually starts to show about what happens in this first chapter is that when we start to compromise the things that we are actually exposed to. So he actually got them, he did all of the right things, but the angels knew what was going on in this particular city, and they had their own reason for being there. Because remember, he said, can you find XYZ number of people that are righteous that are actually in this particular town? And if so, this is what will happen. I will spare them. So this is what took place. So now we have these angels showing up on the scene. And then we go, it says into 4 and 5, it says, now before they lay down, the men of the city and the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house, and they came to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them carnally. Now, what we actually hear right now is that we have these particular men that have admired or noticed that these two strangers have come in, and it's aroused their carnal being about these men being here. Now, we know that the city of Sodom was basically a place where this was not unusual behavior for them to be aroused by uh, males, by men. And because it talked about the young and the old. Not to say that there weren't other women in this particular city, but the arousal is where they really centered on us talking about the males here. So it says where the men came out that they want them to bring them out. These citizens of Sodom, they clearly, for their own desires and lust, they wanted to actually have these men in an inappropriate way. So they were demanding that they bring them out, and because they wanted to abuse and satisfy their own immoral behavior with these men. And the interesting thing was that it was just not only the older men, but it were young men as well. And they were very blatant with it because they demanded it. They were like, "Give them to us, give them to us. Let's not do this." And this is just a very disheartening type scene because you could see that it was going against the laws of nature. I guess that's the best way to say it. Going against the laws of nature with their desires or the burning um, lusts that they had for these particular two individuals that showed up into their town, but they did not know who they were. Then Lot bargains for the life and the safety of his guests is where we go through 6 through 9. So Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind him, and said, "Please, my brother, do not do so wickedly. See now, I have two daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you." Now that's a point right there to see that Lot, I won't say that he thought so lowly of his daughters, but it just kind of told the hierarchy of things that were going on because most people that would be a very hard thing to do, to offer your daughters to a ravenous mob of men that want to do these vile and disgusting things. But he offered his children, his daughters that were virgin because they had not known men before. And then it says that let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof. And they said, "Stand back." They said, "This one came in and to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge." So he's saying, "How are you trying to flip the script on us right now? You know what is what we do here. Now you're trying to be self-righteous and be a judge against us. What? Who do you think you are?" So you see, when you start to compromise, you lose your effectiveness because people don't see which way you stood. That because you could tell by the statement that he made that if he had stood on the side of right all the time, that it would not have been, "Who do you think you are?" now trying to come in and judge us or act like a judge. You know what we do. You know how this is. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. So now he's telling them, "We don't respect you. How you gonna try to come in here and be moral?" What we're saying is that if you don't move out the way, we'll get you. We'll do to you worse than what we want to do to them. So they pressed hard against the men and the man Lot and came near to break down the door. Their determination on what they wanted to do, that driving lust to satisfy their flesh, it did not matter. There is no loyalty in that. So they were getting to the point where that whatever it took to get what they wanted, they didn't care who it was. So now Lot has moved from a person that had some type of civic leadership role, because remember, he was sitting at the gate, that now he's become a victim or prey at this point because of what's going on. And even with him acting out and offering his daughters, they didn't want that. They didn't have any desire to have these girls. Then it says, but then the angels provided protection at the door. This is where we're coming out. And it says, then the men reached out their hand, and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became very weary, trying to find the door. So even though the angel struck out and gave them physical blindness, their inner desire and deceitfulness kept them still trying, because it said it made them actually weary, meaning they got tired trying to find the door. They couldn't see it. So it did not deter them that a physical thing started to happen to them, because they still wanted what they wanted, and it did not matter. So this is where we talk about the level of depravity that's actually going on at this point, that no matter what I lost in the process, I still want what I want. Most people, when you experience things like that, it hurts you or cause pain, or you lose limb, sight, or anything like that, it usually slows you down. But here we see there was no slowing down to what was actually happening with these particular people of Sodom. Then the angels' deliverance to Lot. The angels is actually coming at this point, we're 12 to 14, that they're starting to warn Lot. And then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here? Son-in-laws, your sons, your daughters, and whomever you have in the city. So here we know that earlier in the scripture, it talked about he was offering his virgin daughters who had not known men. But if you remember in the story how we talked about that whenever someone is actually betrothed to someone, it is considered to be married to those people. They just have not had the wedding to consummate. But once those prearranged marriages actually took place, you actually belong to whoever that husband was, that betrothing, because normally there was an exchange of goods basically for those brides. You brought sheep and cattle and all these other kind of things like that, or whatever the possessions that you had to give to the father. So they had potential husbands that were actually there. And he says, whoever you have in the city, take them out of this place, for we will destroy this place, because the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So the angels were very clear in their message to Lot to tell him exactly what was going to happen. And they were telling him that make sure those that are connected to you, because remember what Abraham had asked before was to save his relative, which was Lot. And so he was trying to bring out as many people that he could, because this is what the allowance was allow him to bring those people out. So Lot went out and spoke to his son-in-laws who had married his daughters and said, get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But to his son-in-laws, he seemed to be joking. They're like, oh, this is crazy, man. What are you talking about? We're sitting here, all this stuff is happening. Nothing's ever happening. What do you mean? And it kind of reminds us of the story of Noah, when, Noah kept saying, it's going to rain, it's going to rain, this is going to happen, it's going to rain. And nobody believed him. This is the same thing that happened with Lot, that no one believed what he was saying. And even those that would have been close to him. And it gives us the message that sometimes, even though we have messages of doom and destruction, those very close to us will not take us seriously and think that what we're talking about is just propaganda or it's just a joke. It's not true. It's not going to happen. So this is where we actually have this. And this is a clear effect of Lot's life of compromise. Because if Lot had basically been standing upright and actually standing in the word and holding true to the word, then his word would have had more weight. And when someone had said something, they would have took him at their word and they would have believed them. But here's what happens at the effect of when we cannot stand. And we tend to go along with just to go along to get along. This is what happens. It compromises our our word. So then it says, when the morning dawned and the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, arise, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city. And while he lingered, the men took hold of his hand and his wife's hand and the hands of his two daughters, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside of the city. So he was pre-warned, he was taken out. So the angels did their part. It says it, the men took their hand. And it was just to make sure that they had the ability to get out of the city, far away, so that when destruction start to happen, that they would not be part of that calamity. Abraham asked God to spare the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah if there were 10 righteous found there. Because there were not 10 righteous people, God did not spare that city. But he still answered the heart of Abraham's prayer by bringing Lot and his family out of Sodom. Then so it came to pass when they had been brought out of Sodom, and then he said, escape for your life. Do not look back, you nor or stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed. So there's specific instructions that the angels actually gave to make sure that they would be out of harm's way. And that he told them that the covering that they needed to be, they couldn't be out in the open, that they needed to go into the mountains. And when they were in the mountains, they stayed kind of in caves to make sure that they were covered. Then it goes, it says, then Lot said to them, please know, my lords, indeed now your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have increased your mercy, which have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and I die. So now the city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Please let me escape there. It is not a little one, though, and my soul shall live. And he said to him, see, I have favored you concerning these things also, that I will not overthrow the city for which you have spoken. And there was a city that was called Zoar, Zoar. So he allowed them to go to Zoar. And Zoar means small or insignificant in the actual title of it. So this is how the angels allowed them to go elsewhere other than where they intended them to go. And then it says, the sun had risen upon the earth, and Lot entered Zoar. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew the cities, all the plains, all the inhabitants of the city, and what grew on the ground. We're talking about total annihilation. There was no room for anything to be left there. And so the judgment was, didn't matter, young, old, innocent, not innocent. If you were there and you did not heed to the warnings, there was just no hope. You fell under the judgment of what was going on. And then, but here we have, the angels told them to go and not to turn around, not to look back. But his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. So Lot's wife, sometimes, that when we're going forward and we're given a different chance or course in life, we have to keep our focus ever forward and not look back, because those things that are behind us can trap us. And this is exactly what happened to Lot's wife, that she became trapped with the compulsion of what was behind her, and she could not keep her eyes forward. And because of it, because of her turning around, she turned into a pillar of salt. Now, when Abraham actually learned of what was happening and what the destruction had taken place, then it goes on, it says that, and it came to pass when God destroyed the cities of the plain, and God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrows when he overthrew the city in which Lot dwelt. So Abraham is learning of what actually took place. And remember, his prayer is what basically saved Lot again. We see this happening. So it says, he saw the smoke of the city and the destruction, and he knew that his request was answered. God delivered Lot out before the destruction came. So God is a keeper of all of his promises, is what, in essence, is what it's saying. Then we go on to 30 to 32, and then it talks about Lot and his daughters in the wilderness caves. So they went out of Zor and dwelt in the mountains. So here's where they are now. They wanted to go to this one place, but now they're somewhere else, because that lets us know that there had to be something going on in there where they were not accepted, or something went wrong. But now they're living out in isolation. And during that time while they're out there, we find that the two girls are saying basically that there's no one else left in the world. And in order to preserve the legacy or the lifeline of their father, that they decided to get their father drunk and basically lay with their fathers. So the firstborn girl, she did to do with her father, and it says about him not having any awareness of what's going on here. And she actually lays with him, and she tells her sister that she knows that she's pregnant. And she says, and now we're going to do the same for you. You're going to go do it. You're going to lay with him, and then you're going to get pregnant. And as a result of their laying with their father, now it's all in the name of preservation of the lineage of their father. This is the rationale that they're using of why they did what they did. But from the course of that, we have two children that were born, Moab and Ammon were born from this incestuous relationship with the father. This is what the byproduct, or the I don't know if you even call it a byproduct, but because of that. And they actually had those. And we find that Moab is the father of the Moabites, and Ben Ami is the father of the people of Ammon. So we see that these people went on and they actually became stronger. They became almost like their own nation. But we look at how the origination came. You know, there was no, the drunkenness that produced the shame. That, you know, it's kind of like that the man would lay with his own daughter. It's just like, it's still kind of the same destructive behavior that was going on in Sodom, if you ask me. But that's, you know, that's in the infamous words of Sister Lynette. That's just my thoughts. Just my thoughts. Okay. So we have verse chapter 20. In chapter 20, we go on, and it starts off about Abraham at this point. And Abraham is actually found to the point that he is lying again. That's just the best way to say it. He is lying once again. And it says, Abraham journeyed from there to the south and dealt between Kadesh and Shur and stayed in Gerar. Now Abraham said to Sarah, his wife, she is my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. Now, we know that usually whenever someone comes and they say that they're their sister, that it's for a point of making sure that there's no connection and that they're free to be moved to whatever king or whatever the conqueror is. But there is a moral sin that is written that you cannot take another man's wife. And we kind of talked about that last week when we talked about that, you know, that when we have marriage, where marriage is instituted, that all of that person belongs to you. It does not belong to anyone else. And Abraham was kind of going against all of those laws that had actually been, because they said your nakedness is only for your husband. So now saying that it was her sister, this would expose her to the people that were trying to come and take her. That they said that he sent for her. So if it's a king and he sends for you, you really have no course in the whole matter. So it says Abraham probably was not really that concerned, but it had to say a lot about Sarah. Sarah must have been a good looking sister because she had to be about 90 years old probably by this point. But for someone to still look on her, and that she had to be reasonably attractive, she had to look good, that someone would want to call her and to pull her into maybe like a harem, because that's usually what kings do. They have their king, but then their queen, but then they usually have other people that are in a harem. Okay, and they said, but God came to Abimelech in a dream that night and said to him, indeed, you are a dead man, because the woman whom you have taken, she is a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her. And he said, Lord, will you slay a righteous nation also? Did he not say to me, she is my sister? So in this dream, he's rationalizing, like, what did I do wrong? Why am I going to die? Why am I bringing death on my particular nation? What did I do? Because the man that I asked, he told me that she was my sister, his sister. So then it goes on and it says, God said to him in the dream, yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart, for I also withheld you from sinning against her. So the reason they didn't connect was because God saw what was happening and he did not allow it to be. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now, therefore, restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours. Now, the interesting thing that we say here, okay, well, why did God do this? Why did God intervene like this? And it was because God could not afford to have questions about the lineage of the seed that would come from uh, the line of Abraham. So we already know that Jesus Christ came through that line. So to know that Sarah, had laid with Abimelech and with Abraham, and the two seeds were sitting there, he couldn't have that type of confusion. God is not a God of confusion. So what he did was let him know exactly what was going on, and that his heart and Abimelech's heart was right in what he did, but he would not let him cause destruction and damnation to come upon him, because at that point he would just have to wipe them out if he had touched them or violated this woman. But we see here, it says, but he reminded him that he needed to restore them, and that Abraham was actually a prophet. He says, even though Abraham was in sin, he was still a prophet, a man of powerful prayer. God's mercy did not leave Abraham, even though Abraham didn't trust God the way he should. So, see, when we get outside of God's will and we start to impose our own will, we start to mess things up. You see what Abraham could have done? Abraham thought about a temporary situation, where we're talking about something that could have affected our whole Christian life, based upon his particular sense of protection and what he did. But God, being the merciful God that he is, always is looking and looking, and he sees things, and he protects us from things seen and unseen. And this is a true example here, where God protected Abimelech as well as Abraham in this particular situation. So God had told him that he needs to restore him. So when Abimelech woke up that morning, and he actually called all his servants and told them these things in their hearing, and the men were very much afraid. And Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? Because they knew that the curse that would actually happen, because he understood the rules. And he says, how have I offended you, that you have brought on me and on my kingdom a great sin. We have done deeds to you, excuse me, we have done deeds to me that ought not be done. Then Abimelech said to Abraham, what did you have in view that you have done these things? Why? He just couldn't understand it. And everybody else is appalled, like, wow, we trusted you. We thought you were, and you did this to us? Like mass misleading, deception that's going on. But here's Abraham. He's going on with his excuse. He says, because I thought, surely the fear of God is not in this place. Now he's trying to flip the script. This is why I did it. And they will kill me on account of my wife. But indeed, she is truly my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. And it came to pass when God caused me to wander from my father's house that I said to her, this is your kindness that you should do this for me. Now here he goes trying to justify that this was my sister by my father on this side and my mother on this side, but you still slept with her. So it passed on from being your sister to a whole different situation. You took her as your wife. So Abraham's suggestion really didn't hold water, as I see it, but just proclaiming that that was his sister. That was why he did it. Then it goes on and says, then God had told him through the stream that he needed to restore Abraham and not to cause him harm, basically. Then Abimelech took sheep, oxen, and male and female servants and gave them to Abraham, and he restored Sarah, his wife, to him. And Abimelech said, see, my land is before you. Dwell where you please. Then to Sarah he said, behold, I have given you your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Indeed, this vindicates you before all who were with you and before everybody. So because of the shame that was brought on her, he actually vindicated her. He made it right for her, that what was actually going on by this outward gift, that you could see all these things. Because if it was someone condemned, they wouldn't betroth all these things upon them. So this is what he did. And then it says, so Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his female servants. They bore children, for the Lord had closed up the womb of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So because of that penalty, they were not going to be able to have any type of, but because of Abimelech's obedience to what God had told him to do, he was restored, and his kingdom was able to continue the lineage of his seed there because of the blessings of Abraham. With this, the God orchestrated everything, but because of his commitment and promise and keeping the will of God, this is how God rewarded him. Then we go on and we talk about the birth of Isaac. We're in 21. It says, and the Lord said to visited Sarah, and he said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. Now it says the Lord visited Sarah and as he had said. So he did exactly what he said, but the thing about it, it was 25 years later for the promise to come to pass. Now, can you imagine? She heard the word, but she had to stay faithful to the word to believe it, that even though sometimes when our prayers and our blessings that are coming, that the blessing is already there, but we just don't know the timetable. But she had to hold on to see that God's promises never fail. And then it says, the promises of a son was not fulfilled because Abraham was perfect in his obedience, but because God was faithful to his word. Whatever God has promised you in your life, you can bank on it that it will come to pass. So Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, and set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, who Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old. And we remember that was a commandment that God had, that every male child would have to be circumcised by that 8th day. So he kept on with that particular uh, discipline or covenant that actually had been made so that the children would be blessed. And then it says, now Abraham was 100 years uh, when his son was born to him. Imagine that. 100 years old having a baby. I'm like, Lord, help. They had some good nerves because I'm just thinking, like, whew, I don't know what would happen. That 100 years old walking around pregnant, I just can't see it. But bless the Lord. The Lord can do everything that He want to do. All right, Jesus. And then it says, now Abraham was 100 years old when his son was born. And Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. She also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have bore him a son in his old age. So can you imagine the talk say, oh, both of them old and they still making babies, you know? And it was just an interesting thing that you just know that no matter that if God said it, it shall come to pass. You might not know when, but that was a long way. But she got what she wanted. She got the promised son. She both of them. Uh, the conception was miraculous because when you look at age and just deterioration of your body, you know how you just after a while your body doesn't produce like it used to, but yet God gave them the ability to actually bring forth children. And then it talks about the conflict that actually happened between Ishmael and Isaac. And it says, the child grew up and was weaned. And Abraham made a great feast on the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, who had bore to Abraham, scoffing. Therefore she said to Abraham, cast out this bondwoman, and she and her son. For the son is the bondwoman. For the son of this bondwoman shall not be an heir with my son, namely with Isaac. And the matters were very displeasing in the sight of him. Now, we remember the story of what happened. You asked him to go and lay with her and have this baby. Now, all of a sudden, because you got your own, you want to cast off this other kid that he was fulfilling your joy at that point. But then it brought you some kind of pain because Hagar used to rub you wrong and rub it in your face that she had a baby and you didn't. But now, since you got yours, you want to kick them to the curb. Like, okay, this is all that's happening. Now, one of the interesting parts was when they talked about them being weaned. Do you know that those kids were not weaned until, in some instances, until they were like 5 years old? Some places said 12. I just cannot see that people with big teeth in their mouth still have to be weaned. I don't get that. I just don't get that. That's a big thing right there. But anyway, we have Sarah here, and then now it puts Abraham in the middle of this argument between the two of them, because one son is kind of looking like, okay, now I was the apple of your eye, but now since your new boy came here, where do I fit in the picture? Which he was Ishmael was absolutely right that you don't use children as pawns. If you love children, you love them. It does not matter, and they should not bear the brunt of the responsibility of the parents. It should have been, he should have still given him exactly what he needed as a father. We're going to carry on here. It says, but God said to Abraham, do not let it be displeasing in the sight because of the lad or because of the bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called. So he's talking about how the seed, where we come down through the lineage where we know that Jesus Christ basically comes through. So this is what he's telling. So he's saying, listen to your wife at this point. So because it comes down to the point that because you guys went outside of my will, that I didn't approve this, but because you were in your flesh and you created this, She was your wife. This is who I gave to you. So you did this outside of my will. So you do what your wife says do. So what he did was actually wake up in the morning and he took out bread and a skin of water. And he came out and he took them into the wilderness of Beersheba. Now, the cool part about that was that Abraham was not a poor man. He was wealthy. He could have sent them with donkeys. He could have sent them with supplies. He could have sent them with all these different things, but he didn't. He sent them with a skin of water and bread, and he sent her away. Now, can you imagine that? How that might have felt? That here we have a child, her mom, and water and bread. And after that, that's gone. What happens? So they were basically out there. And then it goes on and says, God preserved Ishmael and Hagar in the desert. And the water in the skin was used up and placed, and she placed the boy under the one of the shrubs, and she sat away and across from him at a distance. For she said, let me not see the death of my boy. So she sat opposite him and lifted her voice and wept, and God heard the voice of the lad. Then the angels of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, what ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad. Where is he? Arise, lift your lad and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation. So here, this is where we hear the first calling of El Roi, where Hagar actually has called upon God and God heard her. And then so we have here that they cried out to God. But God, even though they were outside of his will, he brought them inside of his will because he told her that Ishmael would be part of a great nation, because it all falls up under the promise of God, where God told Abraham when he changed his name from Abram to Abraham that he would be a father of all nations. So here we start to see the birthing of the nations. Then God actually provides for Hagar and Ishmael. Then God opened the eyes and she saw the water well. Now, the water well may have been there the whole time, but sometimes when you get into desperation, you can't sit back and trust God that he will take care of you. So after she heard this word, it seems like the scales fell off her eyes and she actually saw the water well and she was able to actually drink at that point. Then it goes on to talk about the covenant that Abraham makes a no hostility treaty with Abimelech. And it came to pass at the time that Abimelech and the Phicol, the commander of his army, spoke to Abraham, saying, God is with you in all that you do. Now, therefore, swear to me by God that you will not deal falsely with me, with my offspring, or with my posterity, but that according to the kindness that I have done to you, and you will do me, and to the land in which you have dwelt. And Abraham swore that he would. So Abimelech brought back to his remembrance, okay, you know when I let you go, because I could have killed you. I had every right to do it. But I followed what God had told me to do, and I made provisions for you. And so he wanted to make sure that everything was okay, just cool between them. That's basically what, because God had so blessed Abraham. He was a man of great wealth, influence, and power. Now, remember, he got that start from Abimelech. Abimelech knew that it was important to have Abraham in favor towards him and his descendants. Abraham agreed, saying, I will swear. Because remember, God had told him that Abraham was a prophet. So we know that Abimelech had some recognition of who the prophet was. Then it says, in return, what he was asking, he says, rebuked Abimelech because of a well of water which Abimelech's servants had seized. And Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, nor have I heard of it until today. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and two of them made a covenant. And Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of this flock by itself. Then Abimelech asked Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs which you have set by themselves. And he said, you will take these 7 ewe lambs from my hands, that they may be my witness that I have dug this well. Therefore, he called that place Beersheba, because the two of them had swore an oath there. So during that time, what happens is that with everybody having all their sheep and different things like that, and they would dig wells and get water so that they could actually feed the herd. But people would come and actually claim these particular water holes. So it used to be a source of battles because of it. So this was a alliance that was made between them, that they were sworn to each other that they were going to protect this particular hole, and that's where they gave that particular name. And then it says Beersheba actually means watering hole. So it would become a notable point in history from this point that we read about Beersheba again, that it's actually a modern city in Israel, and it's called Beersheba, Sheva. And then we go on. Abraham calls on the name of the Lord. Thus said the Lord, that he made a covenant at Beersheba. So Abimelech and his commander of the army, they returned to the land of the Philistines. Then Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines many days. So with Abraham actually planting this tree takes a long time to actually grow. But Abraham knew that God had promised the land to him and his descendants. So it was almost like a marker by him planting this particular tree, that they would be able to come back and know that was almost like a birthright, that it was a marker, almost like a plot line to identify that that was actually their land and the promise that had been made there. And even though through this time of conflict in his family and among his neighbors, Abraham kept a real live walk with God. Conflict did not drive him away from God, but he allowed it to push him closer. So we have to see that out of all these things that happen, out of catastrophe and everything, we're not to fall away from God, but we actually to push closer into God, because God has already known what the plan that he has for us, but we just have to trust him, because we've seen examples here of trusting God and what it's actually gotten them. Okay, so Abimelech was not doing Abraham a favor, and he was saving himself from death. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Because if he had gone against what God had said, he'd already told him in a dream that I will kill you. I'll kill you and everybody attached to you. So this is what we have. I hope you've gotten something out of this. Sorry, I got to work on getting this down. But look into the story. It's a great story. Thank you so much for being with us. Make sure that you're here tomorrow at 6 o'clock, where we continue. It's about time. It's about time, where we're going through the Bible chronologically to make sure that we can fit the pieces into the story and it makes more sense to us. God bless you all, and I'll see you later. Bye.